She warned me, careful. I'm addictive, but I never expected how true her words would be. The sun had just begun its descent, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood when I first saw her. I had recently moved into the small, quiet apartment complex, settling into the unfamiliar rhythm of suburban life. It was supposed to be a fresh start, just me, a place of my own, and the promise of peace. But that evening, something shifted. I was walking back to my apartment when I saw her standing in her doorway, a soft breeze tousling her hair. She was older than me, I guessed around 40. Her presence was striking, not in an obvious way, but in a quiet, graceful manner. She wore a casual yet stylish outfit, a pair of jeans and a loose blouse that hinted at elegance without trying too hard. Her eyes caught mine for a brief moment, and I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected. I immediately looked away, my heart racing for reasons I couldn't quite explain. I was a little embarrassed by the way my pulse quickened, and it didn't help that she had caught me staring. But she didn't seem bothered. She gave me a small, knowing smile, one that was at once warm and distant. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they've seen it all and aren't fazed by much anymore. I wasn't sure what to do, so I did what any socially awkward person would do. I nodded politely and continued walking to my apartment, my mind replaying the interaction in overdrive. Her eyes. Her smile. There was something in her expression that intrigued me, something that made me want to know more, but I resisted the urge. It was probably just my mind playing tricks, I told myself. She was just my neighbor. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than the casual interaction had revealed. The next few days, I found myself noticing her more than I'd like to admit. I'd catch glimpses of her in the hallway, or hear the soft sound of her laughter drifting through the walls when she was on the phone. It was a strange thing, how someone could so easily invade your thoughts without even trying. I hadn't expected her to have this effect on me, especially not someone who seemed so put together, someone who probably had her life well in hand. There was a kind of loneliness in her, though, that I couldn't ignore. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless you were paying close attention. I'd seen the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was looking, or the way her eyes seemed to linger on something, maybe a memory, before quickly looking away. As I stood in front of my apartment door that evening, ready to retreat to my quiet sanctuary, I realized that I was curious. Curious about her life. Curious about why she had that air of quiet sadness around her, despite the confidence she projected. I knew I shouldn't feel drawn to her. She was older, had lived more life, and was probably more complicated than I could even understand. But something about her felt so real. It was that understated vulnerability that pulled me in, like an unspoken invitation to get closer. And for the first time in weeks, I found myself wishing for an excuse to start a conversation. I didn't act on it that night, but I couldn't deny that the seed had been planted. This neighbor, this woman, had quietly started to occupy space in my thoughts. And for reasons I couldn't yet explain, I was strangely okay with that. The days following our first brief encounter felt oddly out of place. I'd wake up, go through the motions of my routine, but in the back of my mind, I found myself thinking about her. It wasn't just a passing thought, it was a subtle, persistent feeling that lingered longer than I'd anticipated. I didn't even know her name, yet she seemed to occupy a space in my thoughts that shouldn't have been there. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but something deeper was stirring. The next time I saw her, it was just as casual as before, but there was an undeniable shift in the air. I was coming back from the store when I noticed her standing outside, watering some plants on her small balcony. She was focused, completely absorbed in the task, but her movements were so graceful, the way she bent slightly, her hands gentle as they turned the hose on the flowers. It was so ordinary, yet so peaceful. There was something about her in that moment that made her seem effortlessly beautiful, a natural elegance that I couldn't quite put into words. I was drawn to the simplicity of the scene, how the world around her seemed to fade into the background, leaving just her. The sound of the water spraying, the faint rustling of leaves, and the quiet hum of the neighborhood created a calm that contrasted with the racing thoughts in my head. She must have sensed someone watching, because she looked up, catching my gaze. The moment felt suspended in time. Her eyes, those dark, warm eyes, met mine, and for a moment, there was no pretense, no guard up. It was as if she wasn't the confident, independent woman I had initially seen, but a person just like me, real, vulnerable. The briefest smile tugged at the corner of her lips, and my heart did a strange flip. "Hey there," she said, her voice light, almost teasing. "You always stare like that when you're out for a walk." I was caught off guard, unsure how to respond. My mind raced, and I fumbled for the right words. "I just didn't expect to see you here." She chuckled softly, her laughter bright and genuine, filling the space between us. "I tend to pop up when you least expect it." She didn't say more, but the way her eyes lingered on mine, there was a hint of something that didn't quite match the casualness of her words. As I turned to leave, I felt the weight of that conversation. She had effortlessly slipped back into her world, but I was left standing there, heart racing. The connection, however small, felt significant. There was an unspoken understanding between us, a subtle acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, there was more beneath the surface than either of us were ready to admit. I didn't know what it meant yet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that our paths were bound to cross again. And this time, I wasn't sure I'd be able to walk away so easily. A few days after our awkward but intriguing exchange, fate seemed to nudge us closer. I had just returned home from work, tired and ready to shut myself off from the world for a while, when I heard a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find her standing in the hallway, holding a small potted plant in her hands. Her face, though familiar, looked a little different this time, softer, with an edge of vulnerability that I hadn't noticed before. "I know it's silly, but I thought you might like this for your place," she said, her voice warmer than I'd expected. Her smile was genuine, but there was an undertone of something more, a kind of tentative peace in her offering. I was taken aback for a moment. It wasn't that I hadn't expected her to be kind, but there was something about this simple gesture that felt oddly intimate. I glanced at the plant, then back at her, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you. I wasn't expecting this." She laughed softly, her eyes crinkling in a way that felt both natural and familiar. "It's a peace offering. I'm your neighbor, and I thought I'd at least introduce myself properly. I'm Lily." Lily. I repeated the name in my mind, liking the sound of it. It suited her, though I couldn't explain why. "I'm Adam," I replied, stepping aside to let her into the apartment. She stepped in, her presence filling the room, though she seemed somewhat tentative as if she were unsure about this small visit. "I figured we could have a quick chat. It's been strange living here alone, and well, I guess it's been a bit lonely," she admitted, her words slipping out in a quiet rush, almost as if she hadn't meant to say them aloud. The vulnerability in her voice caught me off guard, and I felt an odd rush of protectiveness stir within me. She was different from the confident woman I'd first seen, and it made her seem more human, more real. I noticed how she fidgeted slightly with her hands, and the way her eyes flickered to the window, almost as if she were searching for the right words. "I get it," I said, sitting down on the couch and motioning for her to join me. "I've only been here a few weeks myself. I don't have many people to talk to either." She took a seat across from me, the space between us comfortable yet filled with a quiet tension. For a while, we sat in companionable silence, the weight of our shared solitude settling in the room like a soft blanket. Then, she spoke again, this time more slowly, her voice softer. "I didn't expect things to be like this after the divorce. I guess I thought I'd be more okay. I thought time would heal things faster." Her words hung in the air, and I could feel her hesitation, the raw honesty beneath them. It was more than just small talk now. She was opening up, revealing a side of herself that wasn't just a neighbor or a stranger anymore. I could hear the heaviness in her voice, the soft pain of something she'd been carrying alone. "I get it," I said again, this time more firmly, wanting her to know that she wasn't alone in her feelings. It takes time. Sometimes, the hardest part is learning how to be okay with not being okay. She met my gaze, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. It was just us, two people finding solace in each other's presence, two people who had been touched by life's struggles and were trying to find their way back to something better. A small smile flickered across her face, and I saw a new softness in her eyes. I never thought I'd have a conversation like this with a neighbor. But it feels nice. It did feel nice. It felt real. And in that quiet moment, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't just a fleeting encounter anymore. This was the beginning of something, maybe something slow, but undeniably powerful. The evening air was still, the soft hum of distant traffic the only sound breaking the quiet. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to another solitary night, when I spotted her again. Lily was outside, standing near the railing of her balcony, a mug in hand as she gazed at the horizon. Something about the way she stood there, so contemplative and at ease, made me pause. I had always respected her space, kept my distance, but tonight felt different. The gravity between us seemed stronger, pulling me toward her without a word spoken. I found myself walking across the yard without quite deciding to, drawn by the quiet magnetism of her presence. As I neared, she glanced down at me, her face lighting up when she saw me approaching. "Adam," she greeted, her voice warm yet carrying a hint of something unspoken. "I was just watching the sunset. It's one of those simple things that makes everything feel less complicated, you know." I smiled, nodding as I joined her at the railing. The view was beautiful, but it was her that caught my attention. The way her eyes softened, the small curve of her lips as she spoke, there was an intimacy in her presence that I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't the sunset that had me entranced, it was her. "I think I get it," I said, leaning against the railing beside her, our arms almost touching but not quite. The proximity was electric, and I felt my heartbeat quicken. Sometimes, it's the simple things that remind us of the good stuff. She looked at me then, her expression slightly more serious, but still inviting. She hesitated before speaking, and when she did, her words hung in the air between us like a delicate thread. "You know, I wasn't expecting to meet someone like you here," she said quietly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "It's strange, I've been so careful about who I let in, but there's something about you, Adam." She paused, her gaze drifting to the horizon again. "Something real." My breath caught. I had been waiting for her to say something like this, but hearing it aloud, especially from her, made everything feel heavier. The tension between us had shifted from curiosity to something deeper, something unspoken that we both knew existed but hadn't fully acknowledged. "I don't know what you mean," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I wasn't sure I wanted to know, at least, not yet. She smiled softly, a mix of playfulness and hesitation in her eyes. "I think you do." She leaned a little closer, the space between us shrinking, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her, but it wasn't just physical warmth, it was the warmth of vulnerability, the kind that could make a person feel exposed and seen at the same time. Her lips parted as if she was going to say something more, but then she stopped herself. Her eyes flickered down for a moment, like she was gathering her thoughts, and when she spoke again, it was almost as if she had made a decision. "Be careful with me, Adam," she said, her tone light but serious. "I'm addictive." It wasn't a warning, not exactly. It was a challenge. A playful invitation, but with a quiet weight behind it. She wasn't just saying she was drawn to me, she was giving me a glimpse into her own complexity, the walls she had built up to protect herself. I was caught off guard, unsure whether to laugh it off or take her words seriously. Her eyes locked with mine, and the silence between us grew thick. There was a palpable tension in the air, an unspoken challenge in her gaze, like she was daring me to understand her. "I'm not afraid of a little addiction," I replied, my voice quieter than I intended, but the sincerity was there. Her laugh was soft, a knowing sound that seemed to echo in the space between us. It was a laugh that carried both relief and something else, something deeper, a shared understanding of the complexity of emotions, of the pull between us that neither of us could deny. But as the night settled around us, the tension didn't go away. It lingered in the quiet between our words, in the subtle brush of her hand against mine as we stood there, both aware of the unspoken connection that had begun to take root. We both knew that things were shifting, but neither of us was ready to take the next step just yet. The hesitation was there, between us, thick as the night air. Neither of us was willing to move too quickly, but both of us knew that things would never quite be the same after tonight. The following week passed slowly, the weight of our unspoken connection hanging between us like a quiet promise. It was an odd kind of anticipation, where every chance encounter felt like it could be something more. Each time I saw Lily, the pull between us seemed stronger, more undeniable. But I knew that neither of us was ready to fully cross that line just yet. There were too many layers, too many walls to navigate carefully. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that, little by little, we were finding our way towards something deeper. It was a Saturday evening when it finally happened. The sky had darkened into a dusky purple, the stars just beginning to appear, and I had just returned from a quick grocery run. As I walked down the stairs, I saw Lily sitting outside her apartment, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face turned to the sky as if lost in thought. It was a rare sight, her usually poised, confident demeanor replaced by a quiet solitude I hadn't noticed before. I hesitated for a moment. The last few times we'd spoken, the conversation had been light, almost playful, but tonight there was a different energy. She seemed distant, almost fragile in her stillness, and I felt an instinct to go to her, to offer some kind of comfort, even if it was just through silent company. I approached cautiously, not wanting to disturb her, but when she saw me, she offered a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," she said softly. "I didn't expect to see you out here." "Couldn't resist the night air," I replied, leaning against the railing just a few feet away. There was a long pause, the quiet of the evening pressing down on us as we both just sat there. Finally, she spoke again, her voice low and measured. "I've been thinking about things. About my life, my marriage, and how it all fell apart." I nodded, not sure what to say. I could sense the weight of her words, the heaviness that carried them. This wasn't just a casual conversation anymore. I could tell that she was letting me in, sharing more than she had in all the weeks I'd known her. "I thought I could handle it on my own," she continued, her eyes focused on the ground, "but it's harder than I thought. There are nights like this where everything just hits me, and I feel so lost." The vulnerability in her voice stirred something deep within me. I had seen glimpses of her strength, but in that moment, I saw the cracks beneath the surface. She was real, fragile, human, and utterly relatable. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't need to. There was no need for words, just presence. Without thinking, I sat down beside her, close enough that our shoulders brushed ever so slightly. I didn't say anything at first, I just let the silence stretch between us, comfortable and safe. It felt like the world had narrowed to just this moment, the two of us, sharing something unspoken, something raw and real. Her body language relaxed a little, and she looked over at me, her expression softer than before. "I don't know why I'm telling you all this," she whispered, her voice shaky, as if she were second-guessing her own openness. "You don't have to explain," I replied quietly. "I'm here. You don't have to carry it alone." She didn't say anything more, but in that moment, I could see the tension in her shoulders ease just a little. The emotional walls she had built up, the guarded exterior she had worn so confidently, were starting to crumble, not because I had forced them to, but because she had trusted me enough to let them fall, if only for a brief moment. There was a quiet understanding between us, a shared sense of solitude and longing. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't just the neighbor to her, someone on the periphery of her life, but a part of it, someone who could offer comfort, even if it was in the smallest, most unspoken way. The night passed quietly, and we sat there for what felt like an eternity, letting the evening settle around us. No rush, no forced words. Just two people who had found a kind of peace in each other's company, each of us quietly holding the other's vulnerability. As I stood to leave, she looked at me, and there was a softness in her eyes, a silent thank you, a silent acknowledgement that, for that moment, I had been what she needed. And though neither of us had said much, I felt the connection between us grow stronger. It wasn't just physical anymore, it was emotional, built on trust and mutual understanding. The days that followed felt different. There was a subtle change in the way we interacted, more than just casual neighborly exchanges, there was a palpable tension hanging in the air between us. Every glance, every brief conversation seemed charged, like we were both tiptoeing around something unspoken. We were drawn to each other, undeniably so, but neither of us had the courage to fully step into whatever this was that was quietly brewing between us. It was a late afternoon when the shift happened. I was returning from work, tired and distracted, when I noticed her standing outside, her back to me as she gazed at the sky, her long hair swaying gently in the breeze. There was a soft, contemplative air about her, a quiet sadness I hadn't seen before. For a moment, I hesitated. I was unsure whether to approach her or give her space. But before I could make up my mind, she turned around and caught sight of me. "Hey," she called out, her voice light but tinged with something deeper. "You look like you could use a drink. Want to join me for a while?" I froze for a brief moment, then nodded, unable to suppress the small smile that tugged at my lips. "Sure," I replied, feeling an unexpected rush of warmth spread through me. Something about the way she had spoken, so effortlessly inviting, so open, made me feel like we had already crossed a line, even though neither of us had admitted it yet. As I walked toward her, the air between us felt thick, charged. When I reached her, she handed me a glass of wine, and our fingers brushed for a split second. It wasn't a lingering touch, but it was enough to send a spark through me. She didn't pull away immediately, and neither did I, our hands hovering just a little longer than necessary. I could feel the sudden shift in the space between us, a growing tension that neither of us was able to ignore anymore. We stood there, quietly sipping our drinks, both avoiding eye contact for a moment. It was as if we were both waiting for the other to speak first, to acknowledge what we both felt but hadn't yet said aloud. Her breath seemed to catch slightly as she looked down, taking a long sip of her wine. She was holding something back, and I could see the conflict in her eyes, the hesitation that had been there from the start now more apparent than ever. "I don't know what to do about all of this," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't expect to feel like this, but I do. And I don't know what that means." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been avoiding the growing pull between us, telling myself that it was just a passing attraction, just the product of loneliness and proximity. But hearing her say it out loud made it all too real. I felt something stir in me, something deeper than just desire. It was a quiet hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, we were both looking for something more than what we had been willing to admit. I took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. "I get it," I said softly, my voice steady but with an undercurrent of something unspoken. "I'm not sure either, but I know I don't want to keep pretending that this, whatever it is, isn't real." The air between us seemed to hold its breath, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. The tension was so thick, I thought I might suffocate in it. But then, as if something had shifted in the air, she took a small step forward. Her gaze lifted to mine, a mixture of vulnerability and something else flickering in her eyes. And without a word, she closed the small gap between us, her hand gently resting on my arm. It was a simple touch, soft, tentative, but it carried the weight of everything we hadn't said yet. My heart raced, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of the attraction between us, as though it had been building all along, just waiting for this moment to finally break through. "I'm not ready for this," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "But I don't want to walk away from it, either." The words hung in the air, filled with possibility, and as I looked into her eyes, I knew we were at a crossroads. Whatever had been building between us had reached a tipping point. We couldn't keep pretending we didn't feel it. I'm not asking you to be ready, I said quietly, my hand gently resting on hers, the touch grounding both of us in the moment. But I don't want to let this go either. The tension had finally broken, and with it came a new kind of understanding. It wasn't a confession of love, not yet, but it was a declaration of vulnerability. We were both standing on the edge of something new, something uncertain, but we were no longer afraid to step forward together. The days after that moment were filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. We had crossed a line, a thin, delicate barrier that neither of us had been brave enough to approach until now. But now that we had, the world around us seemed to shift, becoming both lighter and more complicated at the same time. There was still a sense of uncertainty between us, but there was something undeniably beautiful about it. The connection we had started to form wasn't just physical, it was emotional, raw, and real. And somehow, despite the pasts we each carried, we had found each other in the middle of it all. One evening, after a long stretch of time spent together, talking more and more, we found ourselves sitting on the porch of her apartment. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. The air was warm, but there was a lightness in it now, a calm that I hadn't felt before. Lily was sitting next to me, her shoulders relaxed for the first time in what seemed like ages. Her hair fell loosely around her face, and I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she looked in that quiet moment. There were no walls between us anymore. We had both allowed ourselves to simply be, no pretenses, no fears. I had been quiet for a few moments, thinking about everything that had brought us to this point. The initial awkwardness, the hesitation, the small conversations, and the quiet moments of connection. And now, here we were, sitting in a place where words weren't always needed. She turned her head toward me, sensing my quiet contemplation. There was a softness in her gaze, the kind of tenderness that spoke of understanding without explanation. I don't know what this is, she began, her voice calm, almost reflective. I don't know where we're going with this, but I know that I'm not scared anymore. I'm not scared of what might happen, or how it might turn out. For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm here. I'm really here. The vulnerability in her voice made my heart tighten. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything was going to be okay, but I didn't need to. She had already found the strength to say it out loud, and in doing so, she had taken another step toward trusting me, toward letting go of the past. I'm here, too, I said quietly, my hand reaching out to gently touch hers. The simple act of holding her hand felt like a promise that I wasn't going anywhere, that this wasn't something I was going to walk away from. She looked down at our hands, the connection between us more profound than it had ever been. Her fingers intertwined with mine, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The stillness was comforting, the kind of peace that comes when two people have finally reached the place where they are no longer afraid to be themselves. I know there's a lot we both have to figure out, she said softly, her voice full of that same quiet strength. But I'm not running away from this, Adam. Not anymore. I smiled, the weight of everything we had been through suddenly feeling lighter. Me neither, Lily. We sat in the softening evening, the quiet between us a peaceful kind of understanding. The world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of us, hands entwined, hearts open, and the future uncertain but filled with possibilities. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes, it's not about having all the answers or knowing exactly what comes next. Sometimes, it's enough to simply be present, to share a quiet space with someone who understands you without words. To accept each other for who we were, for what we had been through, and for what we could become together. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel as frightening. It felt like the beginning of something new, something worth exploring. And with her beside me, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together.